Hey, it's Mark Pfeiffer here, and today I'd like to talk to you about the price to rent ratio and how you can use that in determining whether you should rent or buy in the area where you live. So first off, let's get a look at what the definition of the price to rent ratio is. And here I'm using Wikipedia, Investopedia. Investopedia says that it's a mathematical calculation utilized in the Trula Rent versus Buy Index that compares the total costs of home ownership with the total costs of renting a similar property. The total costs of home ownership considered by the ratio include, these are all costs that you would incur if you owned a property, your mortgage principal and interest, property taxes, insurance, closing costs, homeowners association dues, mortgage insurance where appropriate. And then they also will factor in the tax advantages that you get. So they'll look at this on an after-tax basis. So they'll take into consideration the interest deductions and also the depreciation deductions you get from owning property. And then below here, Investopedia says that essentially the price to rent ratio, the calculation for it is the average list price of the properties in your area divided by the average rent times 12. If you want to get more specific, you could do the price to rent ratio for a particular property, which we'll get into right now. So here in this Excel spreadsheet, I've written total cost, which is your purchase price plus all the improvements you have to make on the property. Put in monthly rent, annual rent, and then here's a little rule of thumb that's used in the real estate industry. It's the 1% rule. You essentially take the monthly rent and you divide it by the total cost of the property. And if it is 1% or higher, that's really good. All right, and then the price to rent ratio I have calculated down here. So just to walk you through this, for an example, let's say it's a $100,000 total cost. Monthly rent, let's say the annual rent is $99,000, almost $100,000. That'll come out to $8,333 a month. So to figure out what the monthly rent divided by the total cost, we're just going to take the total cost, or the monthly rent, C5 divided by the total cost, and that gets us 8.3%. And then for the price to rent ratio, we're going to take the total cost divided by the annual rent, and that gets us a price to rent ratio of 1. Now what does that mean? If we go back to our definition, Investopedia says a price to rent ratio of 1 to 15 is it's much better to buy than to rent. A price to rent ratio of 16 to 20 is it's typically better than to rent than to buy. And then with a price to rent ratio of 21 or more, it's much better to rent than to buy. Okay, so this 1, what does that mean? Should we rent or should we buy? Well, according to Investopedia, it's much better to buy. And why is that? Well, with a monthly rent of $8,333, if I am renting in this market and we're following the 1% rule, that 8.3% is higher than the 1%. So it just makes sense to buy here because if I bought, I could rent this out and make a lot more money. So what I did here is, let me just unhide these, is I did this for different scenarios, keeping the same purchase price, and then changing the price to rent ratio from 1 to 21 and seeing how the numbers are impacted. So over here it was much better to buy than to rent, but over here at 21 it's becoming much better to rent than to buy. So let's look at the monthly rents. Here the monthly rent is $397, and here the monthly rent is $8,333. Okay, so let's say I rented a place here, right? I would be paying $8,333 a month. Now that's really high rent. Versus over here, if I'm paying $397 a month rent, it's actually really cheap. Therefore, it's much better to rent in this area, assuming all of the variables are the same, because I'm paying a lot less in monthly rent. Now, conversely, where would it be better to purchase a property as an investor? In this case, since as an investor I'm only going to make $397 in monthly gross rents, my capital, assuming all other variables are the same, we're going to say this is the same market, my capital is much better served being put into this investment property where I'm going to get $8,333 a month in rent. Okay, now below here I have some more info for you guys. Okay, so the price to rent ratio can be used as an indication of when to sell. If it rises above 21, then you should definitely sell your property and rent one, as I just kind of discussed over here. So why don't people buy if it's better to do it? For example, over here in this scenario, why is it this way? Why wouldn't more people buy their properties? Why do people still rent? Well, some things that force people to rent is they could have bad credit. If someone has bad credit, they still need a place to live, so they're going to be forced to become renters. Or conversely, they may move in with friends of theirs, with their family. There's some other options, but that's one reason why. Mobility is another thing. Let's say you don't expect to stay in the area for that long, then it's much better for you to rent a place than to buy one. Because if you buy one, you're kind of anchoring yourself into that area, and also there's a lot of costs for the transaction of buying a place and then also selling if you plan to leave. Those would be things like broker commissions of 6%. So that's one. And then fear. During this recent recession, a lot of people lost their homes, and their orientation or their perception of home ownership is not that positive. So they may be fearful to purchase a property, and that holds them back, and they think that renting is a better option, and they don't really look at the numbers to help guide them. They're more basing their decisions off of their emotions. Okay. What else here? So this we kind of went over before in the Investopedia article of all the expenses of home ownership. When people think of buying a home, they typically think of all the benefits of buying a home. There's going to be their own place to live. They'll build equity. It'll feel better for them. But it's also important to take into consideration the expenses of owning a home. So what I'd like to leave you guys off with today are 2 exercises to do. These are actual properties that I saw on Zillow. The first one is one in Montgomery, Alabama, and the second one is one in San Francisco, California. And I'd like you to calculate what the price to rent ratios are for each of these. And all the information you need is right here. And I'll have the answer key in the comments, the description below. And then here's some further questions for you to answer. And I'll have my thoughts on those. I hope this has been helpful for you, and please let me know if there's anything else you'd like to learn about. I'm more than happy to create a video on those subjects. And if you need to reach me, my number is 310-866-7463. All right, guys, till next time.